chapter 1. It's entitled My Story. And just a quick funny aside, when I first wrote The Bullied Brain, it was very academic, and I sent it to my agent, who's in New York, and he wrote me back and said, nobody wants to read this book. And I was really shocked. I was like, why? What's wrong with it? What's up, John? And he said, they want to know your story. You haven't said a single thing about yourself or why you care about this or why you're writing about it. And so I had to go back to the drawing board, put my academic self to the left, and do a deep dive into my story. And it's still a little awkward for me. It doesn't come naturally. I'm trained not to do that. But this is a book about rewiring. It's a book about unwiring things that we've learned. And so it is appropriate that I am biting the bullet and sharing my story at the start of this book. Within the first couple of years as teacher at a very wealthy, established, private, international boarding school, I reported abuse being done by a colleague. He was a talented drama teacher who put on spectacular yearly musicals in a professional theater. He was also abusive, psychologically, sexually, and physically. Faculty, parents, and students were frequently in distress, with some reporting to the director and to the chaplain. I simply added my voice to this concerned group, not at all anticipating that I would be treated as if I were the one doing something wrong. I did not know the word gaslighting. It did not occur to me that the director would outright bully me and retaliate against me for bringing up serious concerns about student safety. The penny dropped when the director patted a big file on her desk and told me that it was about me. I might not have known that this was textbook gaslighting, using a reversal to confuse someone, but I knew it was wrong. I observed and heard reports about an abusive colleague. The director told me that I was the problem for reporting my colleague. Gaslighting is designed to confuse your perceptions and mess up your sense of reality. It's highly effective. I took my concerns to the institution's leader. I told him a simple, anonymous survey would give him the information he needed to deal with the abuse crisis. Rather surprisingly, he yelled at me, "Do not tell me how to do my job." I gave up. The teacher continued abusing. When faculty, parents, and students told me their concerns, I told them that I was powerless and they needed to report to the director. The school's chaplain was positioned as a moral leader, but also as a kind of counselor, even an HR representative, because the school, with hundreds of employees, did not have an HR rep, let alone an HR department. He began commiserating with me about our abusive colleague. He acted as a counselor with students and faculty, enabling him to know privileged, vulnerable information. I don't know if he had any professional training or certification to take this role. For some reason, although in the leadership circle, he seemed as powerless as I was to protect students, but he assured me that he was very concerned and was keeping an eye on the abusive teacher. It never occurred to me that he'd been dispatched to get information from me, assuage my worries, and act as a friend. He was betraying me, but I had no idea. As we will examine in greater detail in Chapter 6, the chaplain's behavior is a textbook psychopath-victim bond based on a convenient fabrication. And I quote, "The persona of the psychopath, the personality the person is bonding with, does not really exist. It was built on lies, carefully woven together to entrap you. It is a mask, one of many custom-made by the psychopath to fit your particular psychological needs and expectations. The target, me in this case, thinks she's engaged in an actual relationship with a caring colleague, one who shares their serious concern about abuse, but she is being manipulated. I don't know if the chaplain is a psychopath, but he behaved like one." And the important takeaway from his conduct, and the abusive teacher, the leader, and the director, is to notice how psychopathology seems contagious in institutions. When workplaces enable abusive practices, they become like a virus that infects more and more people. We see this in history, when enormous numbers of the populace behave in psychopathic ways, once those in power establish it as necessary, normal, and accepted. In part 2, we will look at how this happens and why we are vulnerable to this specific kind of betrayal. Within 5 years, the drama teacher would be fired, under the private school euphemism, retired early. By this time, a much bigger scandal was brewing that would rip the blinders from my eyes and put me on the whistleblower path. When a director and leader cover up and enable abuse, when they comfortably use a figure such as the chaplain to further manipulate those who are appalled by the abuse and speak up, it's hardly surprising that another abuse scandal with a different set of colleagues jolted me out of my powerless state. I was going about my work with blinders on, collecting my salary, belonging to my cherished community, when once again, abuse was reported directly to me. It was a whole other department, and this time it wasn't just one colleague. It was 4. 2 are discussed here, the others are another story. The reason I became intrigued, and why some people's brains succumb to gaslighting, but others don't, was because this time so many of the targets spoke up. I watched with particular interest one target see right through the director, leader, and even the chaplain's facade and outright reject their manipulations. Although I had heard directly about the abuse from multiple targets, he was one of the targets. He had been subjected to repeat bullying by 2 teachers, physical and psychological abuse, entwined with a kind of twisted sexual harassment for 2 years. It began mildly in textbook fashion and became progressively more and more intense. It began with grooming. The younger teacher would lure him in with a kind of mentoring approach that slowly morphed into threatening, vicious attacks. The grooming teacher recognized this student's talent and used it to make it seem normal that he would receive one-on-one time and mentoring. As a junior, the student was brought along to the year's culminating seniors competition, which is a way to showcase the opportunities a teacher can provide to those who bow down. The grooming teacher, along with his colleague, said this target would be the X factor the following year because of his talent. Once he was lured in, once the honeymoon was over, his talent was used to publicly shame him over and over in front of his peers. Although his talent would be acknowledged, he'd be condemned for not using it because he wasn't trying. He was repeatedly lambasted with public shaming, verbal abuse, and physical assaults. He and his team were repeatedly put down with slurs. They were called fucking retards, fucking embarrassments, fucking pathetic. The physical assaults were intensified by sexual harassment, which was layered into the repeat onslaught of humiliation. The team were all young men, and the teachers were also male. But this student was a special target. All work would be stopped by the teachers. The team would gather into an uneasy audience. The young teacher would yell rhetorical questions in his face about how he was so talented, but he wasn't trying. Do you even like work? The teacher questioned his commitment to the institution over and over. He asked him what he was worth. The other teacher would watch, and the team would have to watch. When the student couldn't take it anymore and tried to back away, the teacher who was yelling in his face would grab him by the shirt or the arm and hold him in for more. One member of the team reported that it was vicious. Another reported that the team wanted to stop what was happening, but they couldn't because they didn't have power. The teachers did. The assaults happened hundreds of times. The twisted sexual harassing began one day when the younger teacher, who had been doing the grooming, abruptly became violently angry. We noted in the introduction, this textbook gaslighting behavior, going from kind and fun to demeaning and enraged, was normal. Textbook. Prior to this moment was the honeymoon phase, the love bombing, the mentoring, and spending special one-on-one time. That all came to an ugly halt when the teacher yelled at the targeted student and a peer who were engaged and interacting in a joking manner, quote, "Stop fucking touching each other." It was a shock. So shocking that no one said or did anything. It was the textbook jolt, the feeling of being electrocuted and paralyzed. Bullying survivor, Nike executive and author Megan Carl describes this kind of bullying as the in-your-face bully who doesn't hesitate to drop an F-bomb. This kind of bully depends on explosive attacks, belittling, and obvious aggression and volatility. It is depressing how textbook bullying is, coupled with our endless enabling of it. It is also textbook, this kind of homoerotic, homophobic behavior as it became more and more frequent. The teachers would call the all-male team fucking pussies and tell them to grow some balls. It was misogynistic, perhaps with the goal of male bonding, creating a sense of superiority to women, a disgust with feminine weakness and anatomy to make the team strive to be invincible. But surely this is not a helpful way to improve the bottom line, make the team more competitive, earn wins. It begs the question, why was it happening? Sex abuse survivor and lawyer Julie McFarlane explains that, quote, sexual violence is not about sex, but about the use of power and domination. These teachers were clearly desperate to establish power and domination over vulnerable targets. And although they claimed on email at one point that they didn't know it was harmful, they certainly were careful to keep it hidden. Considering that male teachers were targeting a team of young, vulnerable males, ones that lacked the power, credibility, and social standing of the teachers, you can't help but wonder whether the use of power and domination was in response to feeling threatened. Bullying is well known to occur as a response to threat. Did the younger, perhaps more talented, more ethical, more likely to win, the young males, did they threaten the older ones? Or was the overarching agenda to use homophobic slurs and misogyny to make the team turn to the teachers and sexually engage with them? If being female and being associated with the female body were seen as insults, a disgusting, pathetic thing to be called as a team, was the idea to establish a literal male bonding, students dependent on teachers, turning to them for guidance as well as sexual encounters? These are typical strategies and relationships that engage with those in the dark triad. One teacher came right up to the targeted student's face in public and yelled that he was fucking soft. This was a moment when the violent, vicious assaults were linked with the homophobic, misogynistic insults. Did the teacher want him to show just how hard he could be? What was he looking for in his dysregulated, abusive approach? How does this homophobic slur improve someone's performance? Flipping back into the honeymoon phase, the teachers gifted the team with t-shirts, but used the opportunity to layer in sexual harassment. The targeted student's t-shirt displayed the first part of his name blended with licious, as in delicious. Delicious? To whom? How is this remotely normal or appropriate? A person's name is profoundly linked to their identity and how they are known in social, emotional, and professional relationships. Mispronouncing a name, if done repeatedly, is well recognized as an insult. But manipulating someone's name into a titillating, tantalizing name is a whole other level of harassment. After intense competitions, the younger teacher would insist on one-on-one debriefs, the content of which the targeted student has fully blocked from memory. This teacher would send texts all the time, and he would be angry if the student's answers weren't expansive enough. He'd even send texts outside school hours. All these instances, when they occurred, could be dismissed, might seem part of an intense program, might seem somehow normal, not such a big deal, but not to me. Because I had been exposed to the gaslighting approach to abuse with the initial colleague in the theater department. When I found out about this equally serious and harmful situation involving 4 other colleagues, either yelling or muttering obscenities, publicly shaming, repeatedly assaulting a target who tried to get away, crossing all kinds of professional boundaries, creating a culture of fear, humiliation, and favoritism, using homophobia, homoeroticism, misogyny, I bypassed the ineffective director and leader who were covering up. I wrote a letter directly to the secretary of the board. Henceforth, I will refer to him simply as the board. He contacted the chair of the board, who then phoned me. I said in my letter that after I witnessed the way the director and leader had handled the abusive behavior of my colleague in the theater department, I didn't think they would stop the abuse being reported from a different department. I said I would resign if it wasn't stopped. The chair told me on the phone that the drama teachers being taken care of. The teacher was fired a few months later. The board asked me to gather information from parents for him. It did not occur to me that I was being used. I had no idea that by speaking up, I was being positioned as an enemy to my institution. I thought I was being asked essentially to canvass those involved, survey their experiences. I was used throughout the crisis repeatedly in this way, asked to gather information by board and leader without knowing that a different story was being told behind my back. I wrote parents and transparently told them about the board's request. I sent all their responses to him on email. The responses not only confirmed serious abuse, but also implicated the director and the leader. Both had repeatedly heard reports of these teachers' abuses and had engaged in processes to address them for at least a year. Neither had effectively stopped the abuse or protected students or informed parents. They kept what was happening hidden within the institution. I also learned from these parents that the chaplain had also been informed and had intervened, as was his supposed expertise in sorting out the crisis. Believe it or not, I still did not clue in that the chaplain was part of the gaslighting. I did not understand that he was a double agent whose job was to get information and hand it over to the director and leader and board. He told me he was worried that I felt he had betrayed me. And I assured him that I didn't feel that way, that I knew his position was complex and he was trying to be supportive. I cannot believe I was ever that naive. The board assured me that the leader would act immediately and in proper ways to address this latest abuse crisis in the workplace affecting children. I supported and tried to work once again with the leader. I had a surreal feeling that all was not right, but once again I kept my blinders on to betrayal, as we will examine in greater detail in Chapter 5. What worried me was that the initial abuser was fired like the chair of the board said, but as noted, it was announced publicly that he retired early. It was once again a cover-up. It was gaslighting. It's like punching someone in the face, then giving them roses. Everyone's brain goes offline. You cannot make sense of these contradictory acts entwined together, forming a pattern, saying one thing but doing another. These leadership gestures are like apologies that hook you back in, make you feel that things are not so bad. Improvement is happening. Ethics are back in play. Safety is respected. The vulnerable will receive protection. It was all a facade. The board's stopping one abusive employee, but faced with others, was like the spouse who beats you up, then shows you he can change. He sees your pain and suffering and shows you it's over. He's different. He will do the right thing. What happens all too often is the opposite. The abuser intensifies his attacks, hurts you more. That is exactly what happened at my workplace. The firing of the first abuser was just to buy time, to figure out how to shut me down, and all the others reporting rampant abuse, including children. Just wondering if we want to stop here for a second and talk, or should I just keep reading for a little longer?
That's a great question. We can invite people to place a comment in the chat if you would like to continue reading or if you have any questions. At this point, I hadn't seen any questions or comments in the chat, so I think we're good to keep going. Thank you.
The intense phase of believing in leadership while they were lying to my face lasted for 5 months. In contrast, the target of the abuse, the student who saw right through the gaslighting, was clear right from the day he reported. He saw that what was happening was manipulative and certainly not to be trusted. Along with at least 13 other targeted victims, he gave detailed testimony about the abuse. He provided an interview to the leader. He then agreed to do an interview with a lawyer the leader hired with the support of the board. Unlike me, who wanted to help, he did what the leader asked of him, but with a jaded, demoralized approach. I hoped for the best, whereas he despaired. I could not bring myself to believe that my colleagues, these leaders of the board, would behave in such a sickening manner, whereas he had resigned himself to their corruption. The chaplain offered to speak with him one-on-one to help, to offer support. The targeted student wouldn't go near the chaplain. He could see the snake, but all I could see was the suit, as we will examine in more detail in Chapter 6. The target, this victim, who for 2 years had been repeatedly abused with psychological and physical abuse, entwined with a strange mix of homophobic, homoerotic sexual harassment, was my teenage son, Montgomery. Regardless of what his teachers had done to him, right from the beginning, Montgomery saw through the leader's gaslighting. He knew that the chaplain was not to be trusted. He was 16. Although it was an utter shock to me at the time to unpack layer after layer of the institutional complicity, it turns out to all be textbook. McFarlane explains, quote, "Abusers can easily hide inside institutions in which they hold status and power, for example, a teacher, or a professor, or a religious leader, or a coach. Their institutional status allows easy access to large numbers of subordinates, enabling them to identify potential victims, groom them by flattering them with special attention, and then abuse and harass them." What is chilling is that the abusers are hidden from the next crop of subordinates, students, and their parents, but they are not hiding from the institution. It is known what they do. As I learned with the dramatic arts teacher and the physical education teachers, the leader, director, chaplain, and board were all well aware. No hiding was necessary. They had all received reports of abuse. Who knows how many times and from how many sources? In the years that I was alerting them to the abuse, they received many, many complaints. The reports were from faculty, parents, students, past students. This would be shocking and scandalous material, but it's not. It's typical. We must stop being surprised and instead become informed about ways to change this unhealthy dynamic. The institutional cover-up was not the only textbook component of the abuse at my workplace. The abusive behaviors were also textbook. The drama teacher and the PE teachers who abused Montgomery and his peers, fully enabled by the leader, director, and chaplain and board, fit the textbook profile of enabled abusers that McFarlane outlined. Quote, "Typically, such individuals cultivate a high profile and positive reputation, created and reinforced by the institutional culture. It is not uncommon for this to take on a cult-like aura, sustained by inflation of their personal importance, power, and even qualifications. For example, the high school drama teacher who convinced students he was their gateway to fame and fortune. A predator will demand complete loyalty and obedience from followers who will protect him at all costs. He will also use intimidation and sometimes threats to silence those who question or challenge his authority and charisma. Another common strategy is grooming those targeted for harassment, extending to family members and immediate peers, employing various self-promotion techniques." McFarlane learned about how abuse works from a drama teacher in Ontario, where she waged an all-out battle to halt his abuse of students. Her experience is identical to mine. All you need to do is change the location from West Coast of Canada to East Coast of Canada, as we will discuss further in Chapter 4. Theater is one way to cultivate a high profile and generate a cult-like aura. The PE teachers who Montgomery and many other students reported leaned on the older teacher having coached for a year a student who became a professional athlete some 20 years back. With this talented athlete on the team, the teacher won a provincial championship at the top level. During more than 20 years of coaching, he never won a top-level championship again. And yet the myth of what an excellent coach he was seemed to be set in stone. His random coaching of a superstar for a year was harnessed by the teacher and supported by the marketing department to generate a cult-like aura and an opportunity to inflate his personal importance. It was all a facade. He established loyalty from his followers and obedience from players and used intimidation to keep his targets humiliated and silenced. He groomed certain useful families whose children received unearned opportunities and benefits. As per usual, it was textbook, as the abusive dramatic arts teachers was textbook. The institution enabled all of it, regardless of the many reports of abuse. The key to those who target others for the lies of bullying and gaslighting is to notice how thoughtful and calculating they are. Nothing is left to chance. They are skilled at anticipating that abuse reports will come in, and they head them off at the pass. They adeptly head them off at the pass. Montgomery's teachers gaslit players and parents to believe that they were trying to toughen them up for competition. This cover-up of abuse is used frequently in sports. If you didn't like being abused, it was a sign that you weren't tough enough. Do you see the circular logic? If you don't like being called a fucking pussy and speak up, it means you are a fucking pussy. You're feminine, you're girly, you're pathetic, a snowflake, entitled, a millennial, a wuss. If you don't like having degrading questions yelled in your face and scenes of public shaming, it means that you're too sensitive. This is what the regulator, the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation, ruled when he received the abuse reports from multiple students. Do you see the reversal? The teachers who are trying to toughen up athletes, motivate them, drive them to excel, they're fine. The weakness, the feminine sensitivity of the teenage boys are the real issue. Blink your eyes and the powerful adult perpetrators just became the victims of weak and whiny children. The teachers anticipated abuse reports and did an excellent job of turning them back on the kids who spoke up about their maltreatment. Like everything else, thinking ahead by abusive individuals is textbook. As we will examine in greater detail in Chapter 8, I interviewed lawyer Mary Inman, who has decades of experience representing those who speak up and report wrongdoing. One of her clients is Tyler Schultz, the whistleblower on Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of the wildly successful blood testing tech startup Theranos, that ultimately fell apart when Schultz exposed that it was built on a house of cards. What's important to see here is the way in which manipulators such as Holmes are so adept at thinking ahead that they lay the groundwork for concerned questions about the ethics of what they are doing. Inman told me that she and Schultz were presenting together at a conference on truth-telling and accountability, and she was struck by this description of just how methodical Holmes was in setting the traps early for the lies she would later need to rely on. When we learn more in Part 2 about the brains of those who lie with ease as they gaslight their believers to their doom, the methodical, anticipatory cognitive skills are not surprising. Schultz shared the example of hearing Holmes position Theranos as disruptors of the lab world and blood testing world, saying traditional laboratories were going to come after them. As Inman explained to me, Holmes would set this all up so that when they did come after them for fraud, people were like, yeah, well, she told us that was going to happen. Inman comments from a legal mindset. They are so premeditated in terms of how they can lay the traps. We make the mistake of thinking that people who fall for gaslighting are ignorant and gullible. This mistaken interpretation leads us to be susceptible. The truth is that those who gaslight are often very smart and very articulate. They are masters of cognition and language, skills that are at the heart of lying and manipulating and gaslighting. When they set out to hurt people, their chosen weapon is words. Inman reports that Schultz was marveling at how good Elizabeth Holmes was. She was just brilliant because she bamboozled all of the oversight people, and there were many. Another sign of her premeditated way of operating is noted by Inman, who says she put only white men who had no biotech experience on her board. They were savvy people who were supposed to ask hard questions, but they didn't. You can imagine they did not want to look ill-informed or inexperienced in a new biotech entrepreneurial venture. Holmes was adept at creating the conditions in which tough questions wouldn't be asked. But Inman stresses that it is we, the audience, who are ultimately at fault for being gaslit. Inman shares that in representing Theranos' whistleblower Schultz, she realized just how much a manipulator like Holmes preyed upon what the world wanted. Inman notes that Holmes was skilled at whipping up the excitement and the enthusiasm that replaced the brain's more skeptical approach, that wants to look more cautiously at what's being offered. Holmes was able to draw the crowd into her circus tent with grand statements. Inman describes Holmes's enterprise as if it were, quote, some sort of American myth accompanied by big gestures that distracted her audience from the more boring, mundane, small print of what she was doing and offering. Inman depicts our falling for the likes of Holmes. Quote, the world wanted a woman, a Stanford dropout, to finally come and take Silicon Valley by storm and be all over the cover of Forbes. We all wanted to believe. We all wanted the myth. And so I guess that's what their brain is good at. They're kind of a carnival barker, or can be. At least she was. We will examine this kind of brain behavior in more detail in parts 2 and 3. We will look at how we think of reality as this phenomenon outside of us, when in fact, our brains create reality. Even more surprising, what we want to be true greatly influences how we experience what we believe to be true. Those who manipulate and play on this tendency of our brains to be swayed by our beliefs, convictions, hopes, and desires are the ones that become dangerous. What is unfolding can be shockingly different. Those who believed in Theranos lost millions. Elizabeth Holmes's jail sentence is for 11 years and 3 months. I became interested in gaslighting because I was the victim of it in the workplace. But more importantly, I watched Montgomery, a 16-year-old, equally exposed to its manipulative force, resist it every step of the way. One of the questions I strive to answer in the Gaslit Brain is why he did not succumb to manipulation. My struggle to stay sane and safe was mirrored by my son, who put full effort into resistance. While I fell prey to manipulation, he taught me lesson after lesson about refusing to submit, making clarity and sanity the only things worth fighting for. While I was tricked, he was willing to endure the societal backlash for refusing to comply. While my brain tried to cling to the community, he consciously gave up the safety net of belonging and carved out his own path and constructed his own resilient mindset. He even gave up what he loved most, to reject the lies that abuse was normal, teacher perpetrators of abuse should be commended for their professionalism, and student victims should be branded with the leadership reversal that they were liars when the leaders were the ones lying. Montgomery had attended and excelled at the school since 4th grade. He was on the headmaster's honor roll. He had won a number of major awards, but he had never been disciplined for anything. Now the school's leaders positioned him publicly as a liar who had issued false statements about his teachers. His track record disappeared as if it had never existed. In chapters 2, 3, and 4, we will see this pattern again and again. The leader paid for a lawyer's report saying that the students who reported being abused were, in the words of an anonymous student, telling nasty lies. Attacking those who report abuse as being liars is textbook gaslighting. It's one of the most typical reversals and classic reprisals for reporting. Threats to destroy your reputation are quick to follow abuse reports, even when you're a child. As we focus on in part 2, those in the dark triad are known to spread considerable disinformation about their rivals. Now imagine how much disinformation they spread about those who speak up about the abuse they do or the abuse they cover up. No motivation for lying was attached to this character assassination from leader to students at Montgomery School. Although it is a deadly serious accusation, no evidence was provided. It's the sort of accusation that results in suspension at least, and more likely expulsion. It's the kind of accusation that could impact university acceptances, even one's career. The students weren't suspended or expelled. The teachers weren't suspended or fired. Instead of any kind of decisive action, there was just the soft glow of gaslighting. The community, at this point more like a cult, was simply being asked to believe the version of reality issued from the leader and not ask any questions. The leader's office, with its advantages of power, social status, and credibility, appeared to be enough to silence obvious questions, let alone vocal dissent. Not one of my colleagues publicly asked for proof or questioned the report. 2 years later, the entire 10 pages would be published in national news that exposed the private school colluding with the government regulator. They were a textbook example of gaslighting and corruption. They came straight out of what Rebecca Solnit calls the abuser's playbook. Solnit explains that the agenda at all scales is to control not just practical matters, but fact, truth, history, who can speak, and what can be said. This is the agenda of coercion and control. As a dependent employee, my voice was not valued. What I had to report was dismissed by my colleagues who chose to believe the institution's leadership and their version of facts, truth, and the history of what had happened. It did not matter that I had a great deal of evidence spanning 5 years. It did not matter that the leader himself asked me to collect this evidence and give it to him, which I did. They did not care that he had already been informed from multiple other sources, and a full abuse report had been written by a lawyer a year before. All was seen as irrelevant. The leader's position of power, credibility, and social standing meant that only his voice was valued, and only what he said was seen as true. Sociology professor Dr. Paige Sweet refers to those who fall for gaslighting as comparable to those falling under the spells of power. She says that by taking gaslighting seriously, we can learn about the relation between macro-level inequalities and micro forms of silencing and disempowerment that people experience in their everyday lives. The micro forms of silencing and disempowerment were done to me by the school's complicit leadership and by my colleagues who were at risk because students and parents reported them as abusive. The macro level inequalities were between the teachers, perpetrators of abuse, and the students who were their victims. Montgomery went from being an honorable student who was widely popular, constantly praised by teachers, an exceptional athlete in multiple sports, to a student who, according to the leader, tells nasty lies about his teachers in 11th grade, along with many other students, apparently all of them liars. It was hard to imagine what motivated them or what benefit they received from telling lies about teachers. It was especially hard to fathom how they coordinated with one another to produce very similar abuse reports when many didn't know each other and they spanned 5 years. It's striking how obviously false gaslighting is, and yet at the same time, so seductive. It makes ethical, sane, caring people lose the courage to speak up about its illusory qualities and instead become complicit through their silence and lack of action. This was my first encounter as an adult with gaslighting. Although I can identify it now, at the time, it put my brain into a fog. The mind struggles to understand reversals and lies. These kinds of manipulations do not make sense. And while the brain pours precious resources into trying to answer the question posed by the lie, it cannot, and the impact is like being shattered. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean literally. The brain and its functions suffer a series of traumatic blows to a variety of systems when it comes, a variety of traumatic blows to a variety of systems when it cannot answer the question. As we unpack throughout this psychological study, asking questions, identifying the overarching agenda behind gaslighting, resisting the well-trained impulse to obey rather than resist, are all critical to protecting yourself against the trauma of manipulation. Powerless, I watched Montgomery be labeled, with the other students who reported abuse, a liar. This reputational blow didn't take him out at the knees as planned. Instead, I witnessed him stand straighter, taller, and with nothing but disdain for those who tried to smear his reputation to cover up their own negligence. Although I wanted to believe those in power who had social status and positions that conferred credibility, Montgomery had the mental strength and courage to see the lies for what they were, right from the beginning. He and the other students had reported the abusive teachers, Once the testimonies piled up, he told my husband and me that he had set himself one goal, which was not to let them break me. While the teachers used day in, day out physical and psychological abuse, along with twisted sexual harassment, Montgomery responded with an iron will. Students do not have the power to push back against teachers, but he waged an inner battle of self-protection to stay safe and sane. The reason my brain did not shatter is because he showed me in real time how to sculpt a mind with independence and clarity. His psychological strength and resistant mindset remained safe and sane despite gaslighting at higher and higher, more powerful and more prestigious levels. We ultimately learned that the private school had an agenda that drove their gaslighting, covering up negligence. The government regulator should have not only stopped the abuse, but also held leaders accountable for failure in their legal duty to report and protect children from abuse, according to stringent rules of the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation. When government bureaucrats do not regulate but gaslight, it's hard to stay clear-headed. When I read the Commissioner's corrupt reports for the first time, knowing how much damage the teachers and leaders had done to Montgomery and to so many students, I was literally brought to my knees. I am not one to cry easily, but discovering that the gaslighting wasn't just in a corrupt school, but had reached government institutions hit hard. Not for Montgomery. His only comment was that he wanted to put the whole town where we lived into the rear-view mirror. During this time of threats and manipulations, Montgomery intentionally withdrew from the school community. He did not go to classes. He did not participate in sports. He did not go to his graduation ceremony. Withdrawal is extremely risky for the brain, as it knows that it cannot survive without belonging. But now it's clear that Montgomery was drawing on the brain's greatest power, reinvention. He was using his neuroplasticity to imagine a new community, one that was not constructed on abuse being dished out from positions of credibility, social status, and power, but rather a community of equals, friends, and educators. He was not confused and seduced by gaslighting. The teachers' and leaders' promises rang hollow for him, and he sought authenticity. Montgomery's retreat from the school might have looked like giving up. In fact, he was shoring up his strength. His suffering of depression, anxiety, and panic attacks could be rightly characterized as suffering mental illness, but his brain was facing the threatening truth rather than collapsing into the gaslighter's lies. He was manifesting unbelievable mental strength and courage, which was very painful, but it brought him critical thinking, empathic reasoning, and mental resilience. It is hard to look in the dark corners of an institution, but that is what people with moral integrity and courage do. In the spring of that truly terrible year of gaslighting and betrayal, he and I traveled to the United States on spring break to look at some universities. We'd already visited some different American colleges as we knew we had to get him out of the country. If the private school could corrupt the government regulator, they could continue to harm Montgomery's reputation elsewhere in the country. To say that Montgomery was traumatized would be an understatement, and getting out of town was a key component of his reinvention. It was cold and drizzling, and we were walking across the campus of University of Oregon, which had been the first college to send Montgomery an early acceptance in the previous fall. As we cut across the campus, he came to a full stop. I followed his gaze and read carved into the northern entrance of the night library, "Ye shall know the truth." He didn't say anything, and we resumed our walk through the rain. As we passed the library, again Montgomery stopped and turned around slowly. Above the library's northwestern entrance, the end of the quote was carved. "And the truth will make you free. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." All he said was, "I choose University of Oregon," and that was the last college we toured. Montgomery is an excellent example of how our minds are scripted or wired in childhood, but each of us is given throughout our lifespan the opportunity to take this wiring and change it. When the brain is wired by trauma at the hands of powerful adults, it can form into a fused block. Still, Each of us has the capacity to chip away, carve, and sculpt past wiring into the kind of wiring that we practice and choose. Especially in childhood, we are wired by others and by our lot in life. But always we can remain the sculptor of our own mind. Montgomery spent many years chipping away at the abuse, gaslighting, and institutional complicity to which he had been exposed. Santiago Ramon y Cajal, born in 1852, winner of the Nobel Prize for Neuroscience in 1906, wrote, quote, "Any man could, if he were so inclined, be the sculptor of his own brain." A little more than a century later, with the use of non-invasive technology, neuroscientist Michael Merzenich's decades of research confirmed Cajal's insight into our brain's ability to change. In 2016, Merzenich, the father of neuroplasticity, earned the Kavli Prize for Neuroscience. Although neuroplasticity was recognized by Cajal 100 years ago and confirmed by decades of research today, few fully recognize the power of their own mind to unwire and rewire. They do not realize they can sculpt their brain by what they choose and practice. Montgomery had the choice as a teenager to remain wired by a private school system supported by lawyers and government institutions that normalized and enabled abusive teachers, or to refuse the destructive lessons and rewire his brain. He chose the latter. He was given the choice to believe the gaslighting of the abusive teachers and the leaders who protected them, or to take control of the information, follow his own path, and create the meaning of his own life. Again, he chose the latter. Although potentially wired to abuse others from his abusive past, Montgomery chooses not to abuse others over whom he has power, and he chooses not to lie. He knows the truth and knows that it opens the door to freedom. Remaining subjected to those who wired your mind and shaped your mindset in your formative years is no kind of freedom. You can continue to fire up those beliefs, those neural networks, and wire them in, or take the harder path of unwiring and rewiring. Every single one of us has neuroplasticity, and thus the capacity to sculpt our own mindset. If you think about it, psychology and neuroscience have taught us, especially in the past 30 years with non-invasive technology, that we can be sculptors of our own minds and their supporting brain functions. The changes in our mindset from how we sculpt are visible on brain scans. It's empowering and inspiring, especially if we want to identify and resist the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity. That's the end of chapter 1.
Oh, Jen, others might be able to join me in, yes, clapping here for a moment. You're welcome to turn on your cameras if you would like to. No pressure in any way. Part of our goal here is to be in community. Jen, that was absolutely brilliant. And all of the shivers and the intensity, my goodness. I'll just invite folks, if you'd like to give some feedback initially about how what Jen just read has impacted you, you're more than welcome to do so. And I've got some questions that are here in the chat as well. If anyone would like to turn on their camera and or microphone, you're welcome to do so now. I can tell you, Jen, that for myself, what an incredible mom you are to raise Montgomery in a way so that he was able to resist. From what I understand of our early childhood attachment, it's literally because of the ways that you and your husband raised him that he had that capacity.
It's so sweet, Heliana, that you would say that, but I have to confess to everybody that it is a bit, I mean, it's parenting. We're deeply attached to our child, and he's deeply attached to us. And we're very, very privileged to have been able to have that kind of non-traumatic connection from the day he was born. But Montgomery also is the kid who at sort of 2 years old, 3 years old, I would say to him, you know, some kind of mother thing. And he would look at me and go, "I don't believe in you." I'd be like, "What?" So, I mean, I
Well,
swear the child is a born skeptic. So much as I would love to believe that it is my wonderful maternal hard work I did, it's not. It is quite a bit Montgomery. He so many times is the teacher to me. I'm the learner.
mm, oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. That is really powerful to hear that he, at such a young age, would have that capacity to speak for himself and to think critically. Uh, I will go to what we have in the chat here. If nobody else wants to turn on your cameras or microphone, you're more than welcome to do so at any point in time. Um, we've got several questions. Angela asks, why do you think your son saw things so clearly and immediately resisted while you did not?
It's such a good question. And Angela, it took me a whole process in writing the book to be able to answer that question. I really couldn't answer it until I hit various moments in the neuroscience research. And so I actually answer that question later in the book, but let's just talk about it now because you're asking it. What I learned is, so these individuals that Montgomery had were very abusive. A year in the past, earlier, sort of 2 years in the past, there were signs of it. Even though it was very covered up, there were little momentary glimpses that we even had as parents. But Montgomery was exposed to it. So really what we learn about the brain is it depends so much on what you're exposed to that gives you an ability to see it for what it is. He never believed that these individuals were healthy or fair or working to truly win. They didn't want to win games. They didn't make decisions that showed that sport competition really was their focus. The focus was creating an abuse culture. And so he could see it early on. Whereas for me, a lot of that was happening behind closed doors. And then there's one other piece to this that's more complex, which is that when I was Montgomery's age, it started at 13 for me, but when I was his age, I was in a very similar situation. I was groomed by my science teacher, encouraged to go into an outdoor education program where the teachers running it were highly abusive, again, emotionally, physically, and sexually. And this program went on for 10 years before it kind of blew up. And then there was a lawsuits and the whole thing as per usual. But my trauma, I think, and actually Heliana would probably be able to give us a better, more expertise version of this. But I think that, I mean, my deepest fear, my deepest trauma was put away in a dissociated place. And it made me keep my blinders on. I wasn't able to see my own son's abuse because I couldn't see the abuse that had happened to me. And then when this all started to blow up at the school, I took those blinders off. And I'm telling you, it's one of the most painful things I've ever done. I started having panic attacks in my, what I was late 40s. And here I'd never had a panic attack in my life. And I was old enough to be able to process, um, what had happened to me. But the bottom line is, these are the kinds of things that make it very difficult for us to truly engage with the reality of what's happening, especially when it's a traumatizing reality. So Montgomery, he didn't have all these frameworks yet. He hadn't built up all these frameworks. And so luckily, I don't think he ever will build them up. He works in the film industry. And if there is, a director or the executive producer, if they so much as speak to him in any kind of demeaning way, he just stops what he's doing and he'll just be like, don't talk to me like that. And, it's a real power for him now. But he came by it with a lot of difficulty.
Thank you for that, Jen. James has asked a couple of questions. The first is, and actually before I go on, if at any point folks want to ask follow-up questions before we move on, you're more than welcome to. Just turn on your microphone or put it into the chat. We're so grateful that you're all here with us and sharing these questions and comments. So James asks, how did you see Elizabeth Holmes when she was at the top of her game and the darling of Silicon Valley? What changed for you and when?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer, and it's always, what is your training? So my training is in research. When you are an academic, you don't say things or do things or speak up unless you've done your research. So Heliana would relate to this. So with someone like Elizabeth Holmes, I mean, basically it's the science that exposed her. What she was saying was not backed by science. And this is what we see with the brain science as well. What I found fascinating is a lot of people want to tell you that, normalized abuse in our culture, psychological abuse, cyberbullying, these kinds of things, sticks and stones, will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. That's completely scientifically inaccurate. Those types of behaviors can cause physical damage to your brain architecture. So I think with Elizabeth Holmes, what happened was science was the first way in which she was exposed as being a charlatan, and then the lawsuits, and then the law documented all these different things that exposed her as being who she was. I talk about some of these major figures later on in the book, and the ways in which you see just how effective they are at gaslighting. It's really quite remarkable to see very public people who have been held accountable by the law. But they're highly seductive. I don't think we can underestimate how much we fall for their illusion.
I don't know about anyone else, but I get shivers repeatedly thinking about how effective that seduction is, and terrifying. It can be really quite terrifying when the wool is, as it were, pulled back. James also asks, how do we build strength and resilience in our children without resorting to abusive methods?
Well, again, for me, I look to the science, and the science is crystal clear that things like corporal punishment, for example, if you strike a child, what you're doing is very specifically doing harm to their prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that makes better decisions. So if you're striking a child, you're causing them to make poor decisions down the road. So it's a highly ineffective parenting or disciplinary strategy. I also am a big believer in if you wouldn't do it to an adult, and if you wouldn't do it to an adult in a position of power over you. So, for example, if you wouldn't strike your boss for making a mistake or doing something wrong or acting inappropriately, why would you ever strike your child or any child that doesn't have the physicality or the power or anything? That's just plain bullying. When you have more strength and you unleash it against someone who has a lot of vulnerability, that's how we define bullying. So yeah, no, there's a ton of research on how, the more you care with children using your empathy to understand why they are acting the way they are, like walk in their shoes. So you're activating that capacity. It's in your brain, your affective empathy. That is one of your greatest tools for being able to have a conversation with them and empowering them with the language to be able to talk about why they are doing what they're doing, and then strategize together on ways to help them. How can you help them not continue that way? Because it's not going to work for society or for health or all the different things we want to do with kids. It's not going to help them with school, these kinds of things. Affective empathy is your real parenting superpower. And it's well documented to be an excellent way to teach and educate and build skills in children.
I completely agree with that, Jen. And I think that part of what we're seeing from some of the research is also that it's not just the corporal punishment, but the withholding of attention and attunement. Dr. Ruth Cohn writes a lot about neglect, and how neglect can sometimes be parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs, who are very loving, who are nonviolent people, but whom don't have the time available to be there when the kiddo is hurt or scared or feeling lonely, and just being able to get at their level and be present for whatever emotions they're experiencing, especially little children, because their brains have not developed enough yet to regulate their own moods. And so they need the nervous system of an adult who stays fairly even keel, who can help them to develop those parts of their brains. And so part of what can happen is for little children, this is why I was complimenting you, Jen, and your husband, is that my guess is that when Montgomery would ask questions, would even when he said that he didn't believe you or whatever those specific words were, you didn't punish him. You didn't turn away. You didn't withhold, you didn't withhold affection for him. He knew that you were safe person to explore these kinds of thoughts with. And for many parents, especially if we're busy and we've got too many stressors on our mind, we might be dismissive, we might be on our phones too much, and that can send a message of danger if the child is not feeling held emotionally. It's hard stuff, though. My gosh, like there's no parenting book, but thank goodness we've got the Gaslit Brain. We've also got the Bullied Brain. That was how I discovered your work, Jen, and it was a major game changer. So I'd highly encourage people, if you haven't read that as well, to pick up that book. I see Bali has put a question in the chat. She writes, is institutional gaslighting by the school and the governmental regulatory agency identical to Dr. Jennifer Fraser's concept of institutional DARVO? Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, when genuine victims of disparate treatment, abuse, or whistleblower retaliation are smeared for the purpose of discrediting them.
Yeah, I love Dr. Jennifer Fraser's work, and as everybody does, she's just an absolute, just a brilliant mind. And, you know, she went through this kind of thing herself, and that lived experience can help so much in allowing us to tackle things that are very intellectually difficult to understand. So I talk about DARVO in the Gaslit Brain, and I talk about Dr. Fraser's work all the time. It's a great question, because one of the things that I talked about in the Gaslit Brain is, so Dr. Jennifer Fraser creates this model by talking about a family. So she talks about how, you know, in her book, Blind to Betrayal, she talks about how a child is dependent on the parent, therefore the parent has blinders on. This goes back to Angela's question too, like, why couldn't I see the abuse and Montgomery could? And another way to answer it is to use Fraser's work, which is to say, because of my dependence as an employee on my institution, on my government, I mean, they pay my livelihood. It's them that they're in a parent role. I'm as helpless as a child. They are the ones that can just cast me out of the house if they want. They can reject me, as Heliana was talking about, treat me with neglect. They can harm me in multiple ways. And they have the power and I don't. I'm the dependent one. And so we recreate in our institutions and in our workplaces family dynamics like this. And so it's always about who's got power. And it can make you twist yourself into all kinds of different shapes and believe all kinds of false things just to keep those blinders on. Because if you see the betrayal, what are you going to do? Not put a roof over your head, not put food on the table? And I mean, I love what you said, Heliana, about neglect and about highly stressed out parents. I mean, as we know, society is moving more and more and more into economic disparity, whereby parents are having, you know, regular people, professional people like doctors even, they're having to work excessive amount of time just to have the basics. And that's because money is being siphoned to a very small percentage of the people. Our salaries are not matching our living expenses, and that squeeze is very concerning. So, and of course, it's institutional gaslighting, political gaslighting at the very highest level. We are in a very bad situation in our society right now, and that's why it's important, I think, to talk about it and for us all to be here, even on a Saturday, kind of engaging in these difficult conversations.
I really appreciate that you talk about the attachment mirroring that happens in the workplace and childhood. I'm seeing this all over the place. I first experienced it in my own life, and I'm seeing it in so many of my clients who are workplace abuse survivors, who have earlier childhood trauma, especially as it relates to somebody with more power. Could have been a parent, could have been a teacher, could have been a religious leader. Anyone who has the ability to withhold something really important for small children, especially when we are really, really little, we are being abused or severely neglected, we have, the brain does this thing where it's like, either I see mommy, daddy, or teacher, coach as a monster, or there's something wrong with me. And oftentimes children, and it's not conscious thought, will go to, there's something wrong with me. That's the reason why this person is acting in the way that they are. So we will develop an internal sense of self that we're fundamentally broken, wrong, or what have you. And that enables us to maintain that attachment with the parent. So fast forward many, many years, we get into a workplace situation. And I think this is why so many of us, especially who have learned how to grind really hard to get through college or whatever it was, to get the degrees, to get to that professional milestone, we will sense to some extent that maybe that colleague is kind of grumpy, or they just have a funny personality, and so I want to stay away from them. And so we will do that thing of trying to convince ourselves, well, if I just work harder, eventually they'll see that I am not a problem here, and they'll want to keep me around. And what ends up happening for many of us in abusive workplaces who have that earlier childhood or earlier life trauma is that when the wool is removed from the eyes there, we are devastated. We are either being pushed out of a job, or we are being fired, or having to leave for our own sanity. And it just brings up that old story of having a fundamental broken part. And what I've seen, Jen, is that people again and again are not just floored by the loss of the salary, loss of health insurance, so all of those attachment needs that we have, but the old trauma comes up with a vengeance. And it is so excruciatingly painful. And that's why I think when you talk about the neuroscience and the neuroplasticity, that no matter how devastated we might feel, it is possible to heal. And so anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, excuse me, but I just remember when I read your Bullied Brain, it was really truly that book that gave me the hope and the direction that helped me to heal.
Well, and it goes right back to Bolly's question too, because that's a very good example of Darvo. And how Darvo happens on an unconscious level, we do it to ourselves even. We would rather the problem be us. That is easier for our brain to handle than to think that the people in charge that have all the power, the parent, and then take it up to the macro, the person that can access the nuclear codes and the military and the economy and everything else, the law, that person we want to believe is good. It's safer to believe that, or our minds are just going to self-destruct. We put the blinders on, we take the fault within ourselves. And one of the things that we'll talk about as we go through the Gaslit Brain is one of the greatest techniques, if you're being gaslit, manipulated, lied to, is do not look within. Do not take accountability within yourself. Do not be self-reflective. Do not be self-aware. Keep your eye on the actions, not the words, the actions of the gaslighter, liar, bully, institutional complicity people. Don't take your eyes off them and watch what they're doing. And better still, put it on paper, because the more you get clear on them, the better you can have a relationship with yourself and understand, what you really need to do. Yeah.
I love it. That's such a key piece, to look outward rather than inward. The terror that can come up if we think about people who have nuclear codes and being not trustworthy, it's how do we function? How do we function? Mm-hmm. So I think it's to also be kind to ourselves when we find that we have looked away, that we looked into ourselves, or when we have tripped up and made mistakes that might have increased our vulnerability, to just know that it is terrifying to live in a world where we can't trust the systems that are around us. And we end up with this moral injury that gets to the core of who we are. How do we trust if we walk into a doctor's office or into a courthouse? All of these social relationships require some level of ability to trust that the other person is not going to be a predator. But what you're telling us is that we need to know that there are predators around us and how we can meet it in that moment. Angela has said, thank you for making that connection with what we're seeing in terms of our government leadership globally.
Yeah, the Gaslit Brain came out of this personal experience I had, but it really is a commentary on what's happening geopolitically right now. Although there is no mention of politics, because my publisher said absolutely not. So So, which is probably very good advice. So it's a psychological study, but it really does speak to our time. And I think all of us are really concerned geopolitically about what's happening and stronger together.
Absolutely. And when we can connect together in community, even small book groups can really make a difference because we suddenly realize, oh, wait, that happened to you. Something very similar happened to me as well. And we start to realize it's not personal. It's not an individual failure. This is systemic. They're using the same tactics across industries, across homes and schools and other institutions. So that I think is part of what helps us to get the gaze from internal and go outward. It's that reminder.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a couple of comments that have been put into our Google form anonymously, so I'm going to switch over to that, but welcome people to continue making comments in the chat. So Jen, the first comment is somebody wrote, whistleblowers are extremely important to speak truth to power. It's been the courageous work of whistleblowers that has exposed corruption and institutional evil. Tragically, however, we have cases of fake whistleblowers who have a vendetta against a certain person or organization. They will effectively gaslight through anonymous online trolling, telling half-truths, lies to the media, and or falsely triggering government agencies. How do we tell the difference between a genuine whistleblower and a fake one who is gaslighting through organizations for vitriolic purposes?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think that one of my absolute furies is the lack of regulation on social media. The fact that the lawmakers don't seem able to regulate that industry is mind-blowing to me. I can't believe it's full of anonymous people able to say whatever they want behind the covers of anonymity. I can't believe as you're saying, the half-truths, the vitriol, manipulation. It's a hotbed for incredibly destructive behavior, and there's no regulation. And then we allowed kids to have access to it. It's just unbelievable to me. So, I mean, I think that really for people now, we all have to make a decision about getting away from social media in that it is a manipulative space. It's just remarkably destructive. And so that's going to have to be personal choices that we all make. We've got to stop just engaging in that world. The fake whistleblower, I mean, you can have a fake anything. You can have a fake religious figure. I mean, the person that parades as a good person and is covering up, the sheep's clothing, covering up the wolf within, the false prophet, those people exist. And we have to, I mean, part 3 of the Gaslit Brain is literally the 6 brain science techniques for understanding whether or not you're dealing with a true whistleblower or a fake whistleblower. And I mean, it's a brain science response that I'd love to give, but we don't have time today. Just in general, I think what you need to do is know that the person with a vendetta, the person who's vitriolic, the person that is using half-truths, that person quite likely, almost guaranteed, is in the dark triad or dark tetrad, which means if they are this type of individual, they are feeding off of your dismay, your emotions, your desperation to be believed, all these kinds of things. That gives them energy. They are very hollow people. They don't have authentic relationships. They don't have actually, they're missing emotional reactions. And so they want yours. So I just would stop feeding that kind of a machine. I mean, obviously you want to look at facts and figures and statistics and truths. I would really look very carefully at track record. If that person has a vendetta, why? What is it that went wrong? I mean, it's all you can really do is that type of, but at a certain point, you walk away from it, because if you don't feed their machine, then they don't get out of it what they need, and they'll go elsewhere.
Well, I'm realizing 2 things from the last session that we had. One is that it's so intense to hear you say these things that are complete news flashes to me, and I'm processing it at the same time that I'm reflecting on my own lived experience. And so it's slowing down my brain right now. And I wonder if that might be the case for other people who are listening in. So again, if you have thoughts after this, Pauline says that she's taking notes. Yes, love that, Pauline. And these recordings will be put onto LinkedIn, and they'll be sent to all of you as well. So you can go back and re-listen. But you just gave me shivers, Jen, in thinking about we don't give them our emotional reaction because they don't have emotions of their own. It sent shivers down my spine. Thank you for that. Yikes. Okay, so the next one, is there much difference, if any, between being gaslit by 1, workplace scenarios, 2, family systems, and 3, friendship or social circles? Ooh.
One of the words that I repeat over and over and over again, it's probably a bad writing technique, but I kept finding myself saying, and this is textbook. And the reason being is because one of the things that fascinates me about abuse culture is it doesn't change. You will see the same techniques used in a family that you're going to see used in a friend group, that you're going to see used in organizational culture at work. You'll see it on a political level. I mean, it's incredible the lack of imagination. The abuse culture, what defines it is, it's like, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but the way I think about it is very much like a theater production. It's a play. People are scripted to behave in certain ways. So their stress levels get ramped up by the abusive culture. So that, let's just say the abusers, it gets ramped up. Your stress levels go through the roof. So you're going to slip into fight. If you're a kid, you'll become aggressive, defiant. You'll bully other kids. It's very textbook. Or you'll go into flight. You'll be the kid that's always not getting their work done, coming late, don't get to practice on time, look the other way when bad things happen, whatever. You're going to be in freeze mode where you just get paralyzed. You can't speak up. You don't know what to do. You just let it happen. You can't even protect yourself. We see this with victims of assault and sexual assault. And then finally, fawn. And fawn is the least one talked about, where you will just be clapping hands as you watch the abuse. You'll be laughing along. You will be supporting the abuser. You will defend them to the ends of the earth when they get called out for being highly abusive. And this fawn behavior, it's very fascinating to watch in the geopolitical stage, is where people will do anything not to experience being targeted, and also to try and battle the fear and the stress of an abuse culture. So they'll try to placate, they will identify with the aggressor, they will do all these things. And a teacher I had in university way back in the day, she was this absolutely brilliant Shakespeare teacher. She told us that one of the things to learn about Shakespeare is how he examines this phenomenon whereby when the snake opens its mouth, the mouse or the rabbit will switch its brain completely off, fully identify with the aggressor because it doesn't have a chance. It's going to get eaten. It's going to get killed. And rather than experience being killed as prey, it identifies with the predator and it will walk right into the snake's mouth. We humans do the same thing. We can't bear it. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I hear that I'm thinking about workplaces. I think this is that part of us that will work harder. We'll just work harder. So working harder is fawning behavior. It's like I will be the good employee, and therefore, hopefully, if I'm a good employee, then I will avoid the next wrath of physical, psychological, financial, professional violence that might be forthcoming, because they have been sending out the messages. And I think this is where the work of many people, Dr. Dorothea Susskind and others who have talked about how the impact of seeing people being abused at work, just seeing it does something to people, because you know that there's a threat that it could come for you next. So we don't even have to be the target explicitly to be impacted and wounded by gaslighting that's happening in public. Pauline writes, this is very difficult for someone who is neurodiverse. Oh, that's an important point. I wonder, Jen, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that because this is a really good example of how our system right now is in a state of complete confusion, like on all levels. So if you look at, and I mean, I came to this in writing the book. So we talk a lot about neurodiversity, talk about on the spectrum, we talk about ADHD, talk about dyslexia and dysgraphia and all of these challenges. Well, of course, what we need to know about well, let's just call them predators because it's just shorthand. It's good. It's dehumanizing a bit, but whatever. We'll call them predators for the sake of speed. Those individuals are masters at seeing your vulnerability. They will zero right in on anything that they can do to access you and make you do the Darvo, make you think that the fault, oh, it's because I can't concentrate. Oh, it's because I can't read like all the other people can read. And oh, it's because my cognitive empathy isn't activated in the same way because I'm on the autism spectrum. Whatever it is, it's all meant for you to look within and say, oh, I'm neurodiverse and these things must be my fault. And to Eliana's point, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to work double time. I'm going to make it up to them. I'm going to work through the weekend. And look at how much burnout we have right now in our society and in our workplaces. People are working double time because the system is telling them the fault lies with them. Okay, now let us ask ourselves a very concerning question, which is why do we not talk about neurodiversity when we come to the dark tetrad? I can tell you right now, the most dangerous, destructive neurodiversity out there that never is being talked about is the narcissist, the Machiavellian, the psychopath, and the everyday sadist. Those people with extreme neurodiversity, it is not normal to lie. It is not normal or typical to abuse other people. It is not normal or typical to manipulate and gaslight. But we act like those people are the pinnacle of what we all want to be. It's like, really? None of it makes any sense. I mean, if you have neurodiversity that makes you a genius because you're on the spectrum, makes you an absolutely fabulous creative worker because you've got ADHD and you're just like 10,000 times more creative. Same with dyslexia. I mean, power to you. I'm not worried about you. I think you're great. I'd like to learn more about how your brain processes. Now, the dark tetrad, I want to see those people get the help they need, really intensive, so that they aren't infecting the rest of us. It's an infectious brain that they've got. Nobody catches autism from someone else. They don't catch ADHD from someone else, but they sure do catch highly traumatized dysfunctional brains and neurodiversity, if we want to call it that, from the dark tetrad. Why isn't it should be at the forefront of the law, and it's not.
I am
Sorry,
so
I shouldn't get so excited.
No, please do. Absolutely. I mean, we see Pauline is clapping here, and I think for so many of us, it just gets to both the terror and the hope simultaneously. I mean, this is what you keep doing, Jen, is like, to talk about neurodiversity in its fullness and to help us to think critically about, well, what is it that we're responding to? What is it that we are being told is neurodiversity versus neurotypical? I appreciate you so much for bringing this in. And part of what I've seen in workplace abuse culture is that people who are part of a neurodiverse community, oftentimes, and of course there's quite a bit of diversity in what makes somebody neurodiverse, but there are many people who are part of a neurodiversity community who will ask the questions. They're compelled to ask the questions, to point out when things are illegal, unethical, wrong in some kind of way, and that courage and also just a part of who people are can bring a target on their back in cultures that are abusive and that cannot tolerate people who think critically and who say the thing even if it risks losing social standing. And those are exactly the people that I want to work around for sure. Like, these are the people who make for healthier work environments.
Exactly. I think it's funny to that neurodiversity thing that they keep talking to us about, because the bottom line is we are all neurodiverse. There's not a single brain. Now, there might be a herd mentality, but that's concerning to me, like Heliana's saying. Herd mentality where everybody's chewing their cud and keeps their eyes on the ground and follows the herd is not a healthy environment. You want people raising up their hands and asking questions and saying, why are we doing it this way? In later in the chapters in the Gaslit Brain, these people are called in the research dishabituation entrepreneurs. So hopefully you yourselves are dishabituation entrepreneurs. You're the squeaky wheel asking the questions nobody wants asked. And, it's creative and healthy, and our brains really respond to surprises and challenges. They're hungry for learning, as Dr. Michael Merzenich says. The one thing you don't want your brain to do is to habituate, normalize, and then just be on like the elevator, the escalator, what Dr. Michael Merzenich calls sleepwalking through life. That is not good for your brain.
Mm. Oh my gosh, Jen, this has been so powerful. I know we're just a few minutes over time here, but I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, especially Jen, for your incredible reading. It's a lot. It's hard to read for that length of time, and we are so blessed to hear your writing in your own voice. I want to invite people, please do share your thoughts with us in the SurveyMonkey. It's anonymous. We really take your feedback about what's worked and what hasn't. We're building this as we go. So we want to continuously evolve. Please, please, please let folks know about this book group. We would love to have you and other people in your community here next Saturday with us. You only have to register once, and you'll continue to get the links for future sessions. Jen, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with here?
No, not at all. I'm sorry that you stumble and bumble when you're reading. It's just such a pain. But hopefully Heliana can edit some of my bumbling out. So the recordings maybe will be a little smoother. But yeah, I'm not a professional reader, so I apologize for that. But I love having you all here, and I really appreciate your time. And especially Heliana's time. Thank you, Heliana, for everything, every time.
I'm so honored to be here with you and with all of the courageous people who I know log on with us. And I just want to highlight what Pauline said. Don't worry, you were great. Truly, Jen, to hear your voice inflection as you're reading your own writing, it's really an honor for us to be able to witness and to experience it in that way. So thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you for everything you're doing to fight gaslighting in your lives. We're making a healthier environment. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Take good care.
Bye.
I'm going to turn off our recording now.